Stuttgart is the capital of Baden-Württemberg and one of the largest German cities. Stutgart literally means stable garden. At the beginning of the 2nd century, a Roman fortress located in place of today's city. The fortress protected the main trade routes of that time, and already in the middle of the 10th century, Rudolf, the son of the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, founded the city here. Stutgart is a city with a fascinating history, which has preserved to this day a lot of historical architectural monuments. One of the city attractions is the Linden Museum, a popular European ethnographic museum whose collections are as significant as the collections of the Pergamon Museum or the ethnographic museums of Dresden and Berlin. The history of the museum dates back to the end of the 19th century, or more precisely to 1882, when the so-called Württemberg Society for Trade Geography was founded here in Stuttgart by Count Karl Heinrich von Linden, whose goal was to promote geography, economy, culture, and German interests abroad. During the German colonization, many societies with the aim of developing German geography and culture, including this one, were created. The representative of the society was Count Linden. Thanks to his connections, and he had connections with the king and the ruling house of Württemberg, he was able to collect a lot of exhibits from around the world in a short time. Thus, the collection was growing fast. In 1889, the City Museum of Geography, created under the society, was transformed into a museum of ethnography.
Es ist so, dass unser Museum ja eigentlich in kolonialen Zeiten entstanden ist.
It is just that our museum actually was created in the colonial times, and therefore it initially focused not on Central Asia, but on Africa and Oceania, until Count von Linden took the initiative and tried for the first time to document the history of culture everywhere outside of Europe. The first, most important collection, which is still exhibited at the Linden Museum, was the collection of Willy Rickmers in 1905.
Ist dann die Sammlung von Willy Rickmers, die 1905 ins Haus kam.
Graf von Linden hatte dieses
This museum became a personal project for Count von Linden. He managed to establish contacts around the world by correspondence and to create a network, which of course was based on the structure of the colonies in order to get for the museum as many exhibits as possible. In the German Empire, there was serious competition between different cities, but von Linden had low levels of financial contributions. That is why he tried to solve problems differently. He wrote letters and requested the assistance of his friends so that as many people would agree to donate different objects or to finance expenses of purchasing various items. The collection of Willy Rickmers is a good example of the network created by Count von Linden. The museum got it in 1905. In 1905, Rickmers wrote to the Count if he should donate to the museum a collection of objects from Central Asia, from Bukhara. After this, a long correspondence stretching for years between Count von Linden and Willy Rickmers began. The museum was officially inaugurated in May 1911. When the collection of the museum had already 63,000 exhibits. In 1911, the museum building was constructed on Hegelplatz. Despite the fact that it was destroyed during the war, it remained in the same place and looks exactly the same as in the year of its construction. It means that the Linden Museum has an exciting history of more than 100 years. After the founding of the Linden Museum in 1911, the collection continued to expand with new exhibits from around the world. So we gradually became one of the largest ethnological museums in Europe with a very extensive collection. The museum has about 170,000 exhibits from North America, South America, Africa, from the Islamic East, South Asia, East Asia, and from the South Seas. Muslim East is a department of the museum that has magnificent collections of book art, calligraphy, miniature, works of antique ceramics and metal, as well as details of architectural structures. And items from Central Asia play an important role in this collection. In the archives of the museum, there is information about how these collections evolved. When in 1906 Rickmers went on another trip to Central Asia, he sent a postcard to the Count in which he wrote, "I am now on my way to the Caucasus and Central Asia. Can I buy something for you here?" Rickmers was a kind of Linden's representative, or he just helped him in his search. Thus, the network that Linden created almost all over the world was focused not only on Africa and Oceania, but also on Central Asia. Willy Rickmers was from a family of merchants, owners of shipping company from Bremerhaven. On the one hand, he traveled to Central Asia with his research. On the other hand, in terms of trade issues. The museum exposition has a huge historical value. Here are presented unique exhibits which reveal a mysterious for the European people world of intellectual and material culture of the vast region of the Middle East. The museum employees call their exposition a dialogue between nations. Freely exposed exhibits, which form a single ensemble, far beyond chronologies or dynasties. It was rather unusual. Moreover, a variety of domestic worlds was also shown. The Islamic art of Khorasan and Transoxiana was represented on a fairly large territory, and we tried to cover all this territory in our exposition. The Muslim book art is represented in the exhibition by magnificent Qurans. This is a collection of the famous German Orientalist, Professor Anna Maria Schimmel, who had signed away her collection to the museum. As you know, book art in Central Asia reached its true dawn in the 15th century during the Timurid epoch and due to the creation of a manuscript in Herat, a unique spiritual atmosphere associated with the philosophical poetic views of the classics Abdurrahman Jami and Alisher Navai, and unique-called calligraphers and miniaturists created a legacy that is kept in the famous manuscript departments and museums around the world. The collection of the Linden Museum presents manuscripts dating back to the 14th century, pages of the later folios decorated with gold embossing and miniatures. We are in the inner sanctum of the Linden Museum, in the restoration department, where thorough work is being undertaken on the conservation and restoration of embroideries and book artworks. Here was restored this unique Quran of the 15th century, rewritten in India before the great Baburi dynasty. This is an absolutely refined jeweler work. Yves Fastenau has been working on the restoration of the manuscript collection at the Linden Museum for 30 years. She told us about the complexity of restoring ancient manuscripts. The Quran was in very poor condition. Leather binding is almost not preserved, and what was left was inserted into this new skin. This is a special protective sheet so that the skin does not directly touch the ornament. Here, as you can see, the entire page was covered with new paper, which was then taken off. There is still a problem with copper-containing pigments, and even gold fragments often contain copper. This strongly corroded the paper. For example, these fragments were completely destroyed. They had to be restored and strengthened as follows. Many ornaments simply disappeared from the manuscript. The part of the sheet was cut off. In the original, the manuscript format was even larger, but the ornaments were also cut off. You see that the paper is damaged and very fragile. Some ornaments were lost forever. This is a new paper that we tried to bring closer to the original in color, but we did not take a completely identical paper so that we could see where the original is and where the restored part is. The new part should always differ in color from the original so that it can be recognized. Then it will not be considered a fake. Here, traditional works of the decorative and applied arts are kept and studied. Among them, there are carpets, embroidery, and fabrics created in Uzbekistan. The robes of the collection are of high quality. This male cotton robe was sewn in Samarkand in 1920. German travelers back in the 19th century wrote that there was a firmly established hierarchy in clothing. The rulers and court nobles wore silk and velvet robes. These photos were taken at the bazaar in Bukhara in 1900. This velvet men's robe with embroidered cuffs belongs to Bukhara collection. It was sewn from velvet ikat created in the late century in Bukhara. However, according to the experts, Khwarezm masters also took part in its creation. After all, Khiva was an important center for the production of dressing robes in Central Asia. Gold embroidered robes were also of high quality. Here they are cherished like the apple of the eye. This robe is very fragile. You can notice here various gaps and empty places. That's why we did not take it out and left it in the same form as it usually is in our main storage. We store the entire tissue collection in special cardboard boxes. It is necessary we lay similar paper sheets between tissues so that the tissue can be stored as much as possible still and flat. This robe dates back to 1900. It is interesting that the tradition of embroidery with gold threads on silk existed in the South region in the 7th century. And in the 19th century, this art reached its true perfection in Bukhara. Most of the embroiderers in gold, and they were exclusively hereditary masters called Zardus, worked at the court of the Emir of Bukhara. However, there were private workshops too. Here lies a silk fabric with cotton lining. It is very beautiful. On the front side, there is a silk ikat, and on the back side, cotton. And this is a sample of very beautiful, fine embroidery. We often use a light microscope to better learn the technology. An important sign of the social status was the horse equipment of the rider. In Central Asia of previous centuries, there was a popular proverb, "If you have only one day left to live, buy a horse." The collection of the Linden Museum has a unique saddle of the late 19th century, richly decorated with lacquer painting and bone inlaid. It was created in Bukhara and purchased by the famous German traveler and collector Willy Rickmers. He donated it to the museum collection in 1905.
Ja, und dann ein weiterer Schritt in der Sammlungsgeschichte.
The next step in the history of the collection was made in 1973, when the Linden Museum became a state museum. After that, it received more financial support, as well as access to art funds, to which, as a private museum, we had no access before. In fact, in the 1970s, a truly remarkable and very sophisticated collection was created thanks to expeditions, purchases, and of course, art fairs. Dialogue between peoples and cultures. The exposition of the Muslim department of the museum exactly corresponds to its concept. The Majolika Mihrab, exported from Pakistan, was decorated with a colorful carpet joynamaz from Turkestan. And in the showcase devoted to Sufism, there are also excerpts from the Quran and silver and copper wash gulabs, as well as dervishes begging bowls, kashkuli, from both Central Asia and the Middle East. The exposition of the Muslim department of the museum has ceramics from Afrasiab, covered with polychrome glaze and often decorated with solid decor. All these items are original works of the 9th, 10th, and 12th centuries. This glazed smoker with artful cut and drawn decor dates back to 9th, 10th centuries. In some places, the bottle-colored glaze has remained on it. It is curious that in the exposition, this form has analogues made of artistic metal. According to Willy Rickmers and Henry Moser, who repeatedly visited the cities of Central Asia at the end of the 19th century, the bazaars had a wide selection of household copper utensils. This rare photo of a tinker in the bazaar was made in Bukhara in 1900. Since the time of the Islamic conquest, Bukhara has been the center of the metal working production in Central Asia. Travelers can purchase a large number of copper items, among which were products of earlier times, because this region has always had huge copper deposits. Table stand with a lamp was created in Bukhara and dates back to the 10th century. The masters who created this impressive object were skilled ornamentalists. They knew open-work carving on metal, engraving, and casting bronze details techniques. According to experts, the metal objects stored in the Linden Museum are typical for the Timurid era, because at this time were laid the canons of ornamentation which were embodied in the products of the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries. This is an amazing object of the museum, the reconstruction of one of the ancient Central Asian bazaar streets on the Great Silk Road. Here, everything is built absolutely reliably, starting with the earthen floor, old columns, and handicraft shops, passing through a number of which it was possible to get into the real Oriental tea house. The shops of furriers and grain sellers. Workshops for making children's cradles, beshik, robes, ceramics, and jewelry. This reconstruction has been in the exposition of the museum about 40 years, since 1978. Its author is Professor Kalter, the former curator of the Muslim East Department, who was struck by a conglomeration of national traditions during his trip to eastern Afghanistan, where Pashtuns, Uzbeks, and Tajiks lived side by side.
Später dann aber haben wir für diese Sammlung
The exhibits came to us from ethnographic collections brought to the Linden Museum from Afghanistan, as well as from various expeditions and purchases. I would call this the second era of collecting, which lasted until the early 1970s. Afghanistan was very easily accessible for merchants and for German travelers in general, so it was relatively easy to find their exhibits in which we were interested. And of course, objects of Uzbek material culture were found in the territory of northern Afghanistan.
Usbekische materielle Kultur vertreten. Ich sitze hier neben
This is an Uzbek cradle that can be viewed in its assembled form. Uzbeks at that time lived in the territory of northern Afghanistan, perhaps because they had to flee from the Soviet government, if they were considered rich men or representatives of the nobility. But thanks to this, the first Uzbek subjects got to the museum. Almost in any place, there were always jewelry shops in bazaars. Unique facts telling about the number of jewelry shops in different cities of Uzbekistan preserved. In the second half of the 19th century, there were 12 of them in Khiva, 20 and 50 by the year 1867 in Tashkent. The number of Samarkand jewelry shops reached 18 in 1870 and up to 400. That is an astonishing number in Bukhara. These Bukharian twin bracelets, stored in the Linden Museum, were created in the 1880s. They are silver, but are partly decorated with gilding and carving, framed with granulating and covered with enamel. The crown of the bride is a partially gilded silver diadem inlaid with turquoise and colored glass. It was created by Samarkand jewelers with the use of the filigree and engraving techniques. And today, it is also important for us that we find a new self-presentation of our ethnological museum in this diversity of modern society. This is a meeting place for the different world's cultures, and we want to create a dialogue between cultures. Therefore, dialogue with Uzbekistan's museums is important for us in this respect. This was the project Treasures of the Cultural Legacy of Uzbekistan in the World Collections with Shahnoza Ganiyeva. Thank you for your attention.